Welcome to this webinar, which I entitled What If? That's the short title. Um, but it was a good working title for me because it suggests possibilities. And what I'm really going to look at, though, tonight is what if what we fear will happen happens. Um, this webinar is very personal for me because it was motivated. The topic was motivated by my own personal experience, and I wanted to address that and share with you some of the things that have been going on with me, because I think they might very well be going on with many of you. Um, I know that a number of the clients that I've been working with have been experiencing anxiety. It shows up in a variety of ways. For me, it shows up um, typically I wake up very early in the morning, somewhere between 2 and 3:30, um, with some fairly intense dreaming. I usually don't remember my dreams terribly well, but I get the impression that from the kind of final thoughts that I have with the dream that it was quite intense. And there's a lot of anxiety associated with that. And much of that anxiety seems to be related to what we like to call the inner critic, my inner critic, chewing me out for some poor decisions that it thinks that I made, or other kinds of mistakes that I made, but mostly about decisions that I made. And at this point, I must have just about exhausted them, because I think each day I deal with a different topic, and I wake up in the morning, and usually I know I'm not going to get back to sleep unless I deal with it. So I use one of the variety of techniques that those of you who've been with me for a while are now familiar with, to manage those kinds of feelings, the anxiety. A lot of times I don't know where that anxiety is coming from, and that's true for lots of people that I'm working with. I'm working with a number of people who basically have had what we call trait anxiety. Psychologists call that trait anxiety. It means they're just anxious. It's like they were born anxious. And in the Ayurvedic perspective, we say they were born or developed an imbalance in Vata dosha. And the mind is very active. There's a great deal of worrying and concern. And so life can be fairly uncomfortable for those people. And often as they get on in years, Vata kinds of diseases can show up because they haven't dealt effectively, with that anxiety. Unfortunately, the profession of psychiatry and psychology often don't do a very good job with that, because they don't ask the real questions about the fact of the anxiety. What is the experience of that? They tend to, if they ask any questions, they tend to be looking for why you're anxious. What are you anxious about? And actually, in dealing with it, it's more about dealing, from my perspective of energy work, it's more about dealing with the anxiety itself, just the feeling that there is anxiety, than about the root causes. When I do my work, oftentimes I can find what the causes are in terms of things that may have happened in the life or in the past lives that may have been creating that kind of state of anxiety that exists in a person. But I don't usually relate those things, because it just makes people worry more, and we don't want that. So I usually just keep those to myself if I do figure out what they are. But it's not really the goal to figure out what they are. If that just happens to information happens to come to me, what that says to me is that that person's particular psyche is ready to share that information. But most of the time, it's not. And most of the time, it's just there's anxiety. There's this tangle of energy that I have to deal with. It's often spread out throughout the energy system of the body. And sometimes probably more often, it's like peeling off layers of an onion. One kind of thing comes up, and then another thing comes up, and then another thing comes up. And that may happen all in one session, or it may be spread out over a number of sessions. Because a lot of times the things we're anxious about are really deep, powerful impressions. There's a lot of energy there. And it takes time for that energy to settle down. I have to be with that for a while. I can't make it change. I have to allow it to change through my coherent awareness, my coherent attention upon it, and lots of techniques that I have to help it along. But it usually takes some time. We have to be patient with that process. And part of that being patient is not having the expectation for a specific outcome and thus not trying to move in a particular direction, but just letting the thing unfold as it naturally will. It's one of the tenets of my work is that the body and the mind is part of that, the combination, the emotions, they know what they need to do to get balanced. And if we try to push that along, we may just perpetuate the balance, or the inner parts tend to just dig in and not change. So we have to be very open to just that experience of that. Now, a lot of people are anxious today because there's a lot going on in the world. There's just an awful lot of what we might call existential threats. And if they're not existential for us personally or immediately, they are existential in the sense of our shared humanity. The first thing that comes to mind, of course, are the immediate events that are going on in the Middle East with the armed conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. But there are many other places in the world, in the Middle East and in North Africa, particularly in Kazakhstan and other places where life is in a very desperate state, and a lot of what we might just honestly call innocent people. People are just there. They live there. And they may or may not have political opinions, but it doesn't really matter. They're caught up by the war that's there. The situation in and around Syria, is very desperate now. There's problems down in Qatar and other places, and certainly across North Africa. Um, there's problems in Southeast Asia, and as I said, Kazakhstan. So if we're aware of those things, we may be even not consciously aware, but just subconsciously aware and sympathetic and empathizing with the plight of those people. There's certainly plenty of news available. If you want to get upset, you can do it very easily just by tuning in to the news, because there's plenty of information about what's going on, pardon me, in all these different places in the world. And people are just suffering, and people are angry. People are throwing things at each other, most of them bombs and rockets, but they, in many cases, it may be sticks and stones, and sometimes it's bullets and mortars and roadside explosive devices. And it just so much going on that can create pain. And then there's the other things like the pandemic, which of course is a pandemic. It's all over the world. India is having a particularly difficult time right now. Areas of South America, Central America, and areas in the United States are still having a great deal of difficulty, although it's finally gotten better for much of the United States. And we're very glad to see that diminish, that pandemic activity diminish, and fewer people are dying in this country from the pandemic. So those are good things. But there's the pandemic. There's the economic problems that we have, and while many of us are at least comfortable, there are plenty of people who are literally living day to day, scrounging for food and sustenance, and many people having difficulties with shelter. Weather has certainly been a factor, both here. There's a typhoon hitting India now. It's it's just making things worse. India's, having this terrible problem with the pandemic, and now they have this huge typhoon, which is going to affect a large part of the country and produce a great deal of flooding and, homelessness and so on and so forth, and increase problems with the pandemic. So, um, it's just problems heaped upon problems. And of course, there's political turmoil, all over the world. Besides the military turmoil, there's just, political conflict. If you're living in Great Britain at this point, there's both internal problems and external problems. Same in Spain, and a number of other European countries, as well as Eastern European countries and Asian countries, Central and South American countries, and of course, right here at home, still the Democrats and the Republicans seem not to be able to agree on anything. And so there's just all of these reasons for us to feel anxious and for that anxiety to be often very nonspecific, meaning we're not aware that we're anxious about something. We're just anxious. We're just uncomfortable and it's unpleasant. And, I was talking about the pandemic, but I should have mentioned explicitly part of that is we're just plain tired of being cooped up and not being able to socialize, not being able to get out with friends and family even and have fun. So it's been a year of not a lot of fun. And a lot of people are just plain fed up. Some people are very angry and think that the restrictions were unnecessary. Sometimes their opinions are based on, a realistic assessment of their actual feelings and their state. And sometimes those feelings are fanned by misinformation, disinformation that is being disseminated about, the pandemic really isn't a problem despite all the deaths, and many people even deny the deaths. So, there's just there are people that are living in a different set of factual information, a different reality, we tend to say, and they can be very uncomfortable. And the two groups, the ones who accept that there is a pandemic and those that don't, or deny it in some way, or deny that the vaccines are necessary. Um, the there's a lot of conflict there, and I've I've run across in the last month a number of stories from people I know, and even within people's families, that we just can't talk to one of the relatives anymore. And I had that information passed to me about family I'm close to, and I felt really badly. It was like. Um, Children and parents unable to have a conversation about it any longer. So in order to maintain some civility, they just don't talk about, those kind of issues. So there's just so many reasons to be unhappy, and to be fearful, to be anxious, and to feel that they need something. Now, one of the things the main thing I want to talk about tonight, in my own experience, is confronting the inner critic, because a lot of times the anxiety we feel is related to a battle that's going on between the part of us that wants to think of itself as a good person and trying and doing things and being loved and lovable and all of that, and the inner critic, the part that says, you're not worthy, you've messed up so many times, you've done all these things wrong, um, you're not capable, and so on and so forth. And the inner critic can be very, very harsh, but we don't always recognize that it's there. In fact, it's pretty common not to see that, oh, there is this, we can say, a voice inside us, because a lot of times it's words that we hear, but we're not even really aware that there is this voice inside that's saying to us that we've messed up. And I've been finding that I wake up in the morning and my inner critic is really going to town. It's really screaming at me. And it's pretty obvious that it's a critic. At least I'm able to separate myself a little bit from the experience and being able to look at it and say, that part of me that is critical is really, really coming down on me for this. One morning it's this, one morning it's that, one next morning it's something else. And the list seems really long, but I've lived a fair amount of years these now, so I guess there's some explanation for that. But even if you're younger, experiencing that inner critic is a pretty common thing. And again, it's something we often don't recognize. Um, it's a subtle thing sometimes. It's like it's just so much a part of us that we don't discern it. It's like there all the time. It's always kind of hovering, in there. What he's saying, no, no, don't do it that way. Don't do it that way. Don't do this. Don't do that. Oh, you made a mistake. You know, and you're just not capable of that. And I've come to because I've been working with this. I guess I've come to recognize that my inner critic never sleeps. I sleep sometimes, but it never sleeps. And it's a very strong thing. And so the mind can be very, very active with this critic and this sense of anxiety. And so it can interfere with sleep. It can produce physical problems, particularly in the digestive area. That's typical. It can affect immunity so that we either have a chronic immune condition of some kind or um, we are susceptible to infectious diseases. It lowers our resistance to infectious diseases. So this inner critic thing is something that really, really needs to be addressed. And I'd like to take a few minutes just to describe how we might be with it to get it to calm down and to deal with whichever issues may have come up at any given time. I'm thinking of myself again when I say that, just like, oh, what is it this morning, and then go to work on it. And then we'll have our group clearing session, and during the group clearing session, I'll be going in with each person and um, just on the subtle level and just saying hello to that inner critic and what its concerns are, um, and seeing if we can't get it to settle down some and give us some peace. Um, so I think the first thing we want to do in recognizing that there's an inner critic is to use that language from focusing, which I find so helpful, that says something inside me is critical of something else, some other part. And we usually just think of it as, well, I'm critical of myself. But what we're trying to do is to create some space between ourself as the witness of our experience, the doer, and the experience that we have. And so that voice that we hear, we can regard it as a part of ourself, something inside me. You could say some part of myself. But the language I was taught is just something inside me feels, and in this case, we're dealing with anxiety. So we'll just say anxious. Doesn't matter what it's anxious about. Again, it's just something inside me feels anxious. And then we want to just kind of inside ourselves say hello to that. I have had people say it out loud. It's okay if you say it out loud, but it's not actually necessary. It's hello, you're there. And then you want to let it know that you're interested in it, that you're not trying to get rid of it, and you're not trying to say it shouldn't be there. Obviously, it should be there because it is there. It's just we want to greet it and accept its presence. And one of the thoughts that can help us accept its presence is that it's there for a good reason. It's there to protect us. That's the good reason. We're not talking about causes. Now, sometimes it's okay to say to the part that is critical or the part that is anxious, of course you feel that way. Of course you're critical. Of course you're anxious. Look at what you've been dealing with. It's okay to say that as a way of saying, I accept the fact that you are anxious or that you are critical. There can be two parts like that, one part that's anxious, one part that's critical. I'm just pausing with that, just feeling into something inside me feels anxious. And of course, it feels that way because that expresses a compassion for it. I feel compassionate towards this part of me that is critical, this part of me that is anxious. I'm dealing really with the two things at once here, and that's quite okay. You can deal with both. And so I'm just settling in with that sense. And that feels good to settle in with that. You can even do that with me right now. Just sensing into the critic or sensing into the anxiety. There might be other parts too: frustration, anger, rage, degrees, right? Of, that emotion. And again, that emotion tends to be a protector so we don't feel hurt. So hurt could be another one of the feelings that they feel. Something inside me feels hurt. Something inside me is critical about feeling hurt, or critical about how I got hurt, or critical about everything, as it often seems to be. And so something inside me feels critical. And we just say hello to that. And we're just comfortable with that. Of course, it feels that way. Now, when we fear something or when we're anxious, even when we're critical, it's about being in the past. I'm afraid that something will happen in the future because of what's happened in the past. And it means that we're not living in the present. Because when we're in the present, we're just, here I am, and I'm okay. And then that voice comes in. And basically, that voice is about the past. Almost all our negative feelings are related to the past and living the past in the present. I'm anxious now because I was hurt in the past and I don't want that to happen again. And so the critic or the anxious part are trying to keep us from making mistakes or getting into situations that we've been in before where we got hurt. So what if what we fear will happen happens? What if it happens? That's a good question. We fear we're going to get hurt. What if that happens? Something happens. Maybe somebody criticizes us. One of my favorite topics to do on myself, right? Is criticism, right? I'm afraid, something inside me is afraid that I'll get criticized if I do whatever it is I might do. And that would hurt. And then we can ask that wonderful question. This actually comes from the option method. Is that true? Now, the usual response right off is, well, yes, of course, because that's the way it's always been. And then we can begin to have the possibility, we can begin to entertain that possibility that that isn't actually necessary. Maybe we don't have to be hurt. Or even if we feel hurt, maybe we can still function, even if we're feeling hurt. Because if we can see a way that we could still function, even though we get criticized, do we have to be devastated by a criticism? No. We could accept the criticism. That is to say, we could look and see whether or not it actually applies, because most of us have had the experience, maybe it's a lot we have the experience, that criticisms that are laid on us really aren't accurate. They're really not fair. As a child, we tend to internalize them. One of the things that we try to do as adults is really just look, is the criticism valid? Your boss says that wasn't a good piece of work. You're not paying attention. You're not working hard. You're not applying yourself enough. And man, they can go on and on and on, right? You're lazy and so on and so forth. You don't sharpen your pencils, whatever. The boss criticizes us. We can kind of ask ourselves, is the criticism valid? If it is, then we can say, okay, I will try to do better in this way. and be honest about it. I would like to do better. I can do better. I will do better. You're going to love me. Or we can fall apart inside. Oh, that hurts so much. He hates me. And then you turn it on yourself. That inner critic is the critic of yourself. And so we tend to internalize that criticism. Now, it may be that as a child or in a past lifetime, we've had a lot of criticism that hurt. Um, and so we've internalized that. Sometimes it was truly our fault. We really did badly, made poor decisions. Sometimes we did the best we could. And it may not have been great, but we did the best we could. And so part of dealing with this as we get further along like this, it's like, yeah, there's this part and I got hurt because they said something and I thought it was true. Now, when we're growing up, everybody gets teased. Everybody gets teased. We always think it's just me, but everybody gets teased, and we often tease back. And that was true for me. I know I got teased a lot. I was very small as a child. I didn't grow until high school. I was a good couple of years behind my peers. Um, that was a very difficult thing, and I got teased about my size a great deal. I got teased about my lack of athletic ability, and so on and so forth. Um, and I didn't have a lot of confidence because everybody was bigger and taller than I was, and much more. And the teasing they dished out was much worse than mine, I think. Turns out that actually I got to be a pretty good tease myself, and so I had a rather sharp tongue. And it wasn't until after graduate school that I really learned to bring that into some balance and not be hurt and not to lash out at people, um, with teasing. I didn't usually lash out at people by getting angry at them. I teased them. And that happened to me a lot, as I said. So it was a back and forth kind of thing. But that's a pretty common experience. I didn't realize it at the time. It was only as I got older, I look back on it and went like, yeah, that's what kids do. And that doesn't mean it's good, and um, when it's extreme, we call it bullying, and now there's some awareness that, gee, maybe teachers ought to intervene when kids are getting bullied, because we're not invincible. But heretofore, particularly guys, were expected to be invincible. You take all the teasing, you just blow it off. And I saw some kids who were really good at that. The teasing didn't ever seem to affect them. It probably did, but I couldn't see it. But I was very aware of its effects. So that was just one of the things I went through that helped to create that inner critic. I internalized the criticisms. I tended to believe them. So one of the things is we're unraveling um, the effect of the inner critic is looking at those, what become memes. They become statements in our brain that we believe are true. And so asking that question, is it true? Is it true? Is it really true? Are you really that incompetent? Maybe you don't have a lot of skill in a particular area, and you can just be honest about that. I don't have a lot of skill in that area. But that's not a reason for criticism. That's just a state of things. I wasn't very athletic. Okay, probably playing competitive sports, trying to try out for the varsity teams wasn't realistic for me. And I knew that. So it wasn't an issue. It wasn't really an issue. I would have liked to have been more athletic and, you know, kind of be with the guys. Um, Interesting. My way of actually dealing with that was to be clever, to be smart, and to help the jocks who notoriously were not particularly intelligent, um, to help them along where I could. And most of them accepted that. It was quite of an interesting relationship that I had with the jocks in my high school. And, because I would be helpful to them. And I didn't cheat on any exams for them, none of that stuff. No, I would just help them along. And sometimes I wouldn't say I did tutoring. That's not really fair, but I was positive with them. So I actually did get along with the jocks pretty well. And I knew most of them actually personally. So it was okay as it turned out. I could tell stories, but another time. Anyway, that gives a basic schema for approaching the inner critic and the anxiety within us, is just turning to it, pausing to experience it, to be with it. Pausing is a very key thing here, not just moving on, but stopping and say, oh, I'm feeling anxious, or my inner critic is raging. Listen to it make all that noise in there and say hello to it, greet it, and offer it some compassion. Of course, it feels that way. It's trying to protect me. These become like sutras, expressions that help us walk through our confrontation with our inner critic and our anxiety. I'll pause here, see if there's any questions. You can use the chat function, or you can raise your hand, I think, if you can raise your hand. I can raise my hand. No, there's a thing on Zoom that lets you raise a hand, and I might see it, possibly. But the chat function will work if you care to put something in there. And my next webinar, I'll just mention it now while people are composing. My next webinar will be June 15th. I'm aware that this is the third Tuesday of the month. We used to always do them on the second Tuesday. I don't know if it's superstition or just, trying to follow along with an idea that maybe or may or not be important, but I try to stay away from the new moon, which was last week. So I stay away from the new moon. And so we'll be on the third Tuesday again next month. The first is a Tuesday, I think. Yes. And so we'll be on June 15th. And I think I'm going to take the topic dealing with acute problems. And part of the reason I want to do that is that I'm finding people are not contacting me with having acute problems, but I did have a couple of nice experiences this past week or so with both an animal and a couple of people, and was able to help them, I think, considerably. I definitely felt the shift in the energy, and I know one of the people I was working with could really feel it. And so I like working with acute problems because you then have something that you can see change immediately. And immediately for me means either right away or within a day or so. I got a phone call even this evening, right before the webinar. Unfortunately, I couldn't do anything because I was about to do the webinar. But after I'm done here, I will help that person for a few minutes. And then tomorrow we'll probably do a formal session to deal with the problem that they're having. But I really like dealing with acute problems because of their immediacy. I'm one of those people who likes immediate gratification. And then of course, I like working with chronic significant problems, and I'm working with some people now who have chronic problems, and those take many sessions. But it's very gratifying work because in the long run, you have oftentimes saved somebody's life or made it significantly better. I ran into a person that I first worked with when I got into this work, and we did quite a number of sessions, but they had an autoimmune disorder, and I was able to clear it up, and they got their life back. And they were able to tell me when I saw them, it was a few months ago now, that they're doing fine, and they're very happy. And so I felt really good that the work I had done even way back then when I was really just beginning was very useful for them. Okay. So I'm going to give everybody a moment to make themselves comfortable and we can settle in here. I'm going to take a little drink of water. I have a transparent cup. It's green. And the Zoom puts my background up there. And now I got to get it to reset the color balance. Hello, color balance. There we go. Low end equipment here. It doesn't always keep the proper color balance. See, like my shirt's way too bright. I'll have to remember next time to wear a slightly darker shirt. But if I wear too dark a shirt, it does a thing and messes up the color balance in my face, which at the moment I think is fairly good. Okay, I think we're ready to move on then to the group clearing session.